Very grateful, Presiding Officer. Scotland needs oil and gas. It currently provides around 75% of the UK's energy. Domestically, the UK produces about half of that, and that's already declining, even with new fields. We have 24 million homes heated by gas boilers. Oil and gas provided over 90% of Scotland's heat demand in 2020. 32 million vehicles rely on petrol and diesel. Oil and gas produces plastic medical equipment, which our hospitals use to save lives. We use it to make fertilisers for our farmers to grow the crops that feed us, to make mobile phones and laptops that people are working on right now. And that demand is not going away. The Climate Change Committee has said Britain will need 16 billion barrels worth of oil and gas between now and 2050, which services a demand for electricity expected to nearly treble by 2050. I will come back to you, Mr Johnson. And by the mid-2030s, oil and gas will still provide 50% of our energy needs, because whether we like it or not, intermittent renewables such as solar and wind only account for about 4% of our total energy needs. And it is the demand that is the issue here, because whilst that subsists, we have to meet it from somewhere. Daniel Johnson.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful for giving way, but we do not recognise that 16 billion barrels is actually also what is left in terms of extractable reserves, i.e. he may well be right that that might be the future demand, but we have gone past peak oil. This is not the future, it is the past. It's about transition, not continuing to use oil, is it not?
Liam Kerr.
It absolutely is about transition, and the fact is that he can't get round the demand point. And if there is a demand, we have to ensure the industry remains here, productive and profitable. Why? Because we need it for energy security, to reduce our exposure to places like Russia, for our economic security. This year, the industry will add over £20 billion to the UK economy, employing up to 200,000 people, 90,000 in Scotland, 95% of which are in my North East region. It is telling that if no new oil and gas licences were granted, it would cost the Scottish economy, in a context where, remember, we apparently are facing a £1 billion black hole, £6 billion by 2030. In a second, Gillian Martin. So it is imperative also to note that ending the industry early will lead to higher energy bills, as the Institute of Economic Affairs said, which is why, when Labour launched what Gary Smith of the GMB described as a stupid and catastrophic policy that they would ban new North Sea developments, people were stunned. They asked, how on earth could a prospective party of government seriously put forward a policy that Smith described as economically utterly incoherent? Indeed, the GMB's Scotland Secretary called it naive, unnecessary and self-harming. Now, perhaps that can be explained by the UK Labour Party's ignorance, but that doesn't explain why Scottish Labour winds in behind this madness. Now, leaving aside that Anas Sarwar hasn't even had the courtesy to acknowledge, let alone reply to, my letter. He was on Representing Border just yesterday, backing the ban on new developments. And if there is any doubt about Scottish Labour's position, remember, Monica Lennon lodged a motion last November stating no new oil and gas licences should be approved. It is signed by current spokespersons Sarah Boyack, Carol Mochan, Alex Rowley, Paul Sweeney, Mercedes Vialba and Martin Whitfield. I'll take an intervention from Gillian Martin.
Gillian Martin.
Thank you. I take the point about demand. It is an important point when there is demand for something that we can't supply. But I'd like to ask Liam Kerr, with regard to demand, what are the UK government's plans to decarbonise the gas grid?
Liam Kerr.
The UK government is talking, as we've heard in the Net Zero Committee, huge plans to decarbonise, which is why we have the INTOG round, which is why the Ofgem has just had a new net zero duty. There are huge developments going on, as Gillian Martin, as an Energy Minister, really ought to know. And the SNP really have got a similar problem to Labour, because they have a presumption against new oil and gas in their energy strategy. Now, last month they wheeled out the First Minister to give some warm words to the industry. They also wheeled out Gillian Martin, Mary McCallan and Jackie Dunbar, all quoted in similarly ambiguous terms. But the people of Scotland can see the presumption is retained in the amendment by Neil Gray today. And this is the party of Nicola Sturgeon, who was so opposed to Campbell, of Minister Paul McLennan, who also signed Monica Lennon's motion, of Mary McCallan, who on the 5th of January was reported as saying, "We do not agree with the UK government issuing new oil and gas licences," and Neil Gray, the Energy Cabinet Secretary, who in committee last month both refused to back new oil and gas development in the North Sea, then said, "This is not an area I have responsibility for." They must think the North East is buttoned up the back. The people of Scotland know that if the decision on granting licences for new projects was not reserved to Westminster, the SNP would be forced by their coalition with the Greens to block every application. The Greens, who sit next to them in government, whose Patrick Harvie claimed that supporting oil and gas makes one hard right. Presiding officer, there isn't time to develop the point that actually what will drive net zero is the current North Sea industry, with these businesses, for example, helping to develop 13 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2030 through £30 billion worth of investment. Other speakers will no doubt pick this up. Presiding officer, we have a choice between UK-produced oil and gas and imported oil and gas, imported from countries with weaker regulatory regimes and emissions targets and unstable politics, and exporting our jobs. As Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham said of Labour's plans, grabbing the headlines is easy. Developing a serious plan for more renewable energy is not. I'm out of time, Mr Johnson. She's correct, and neither Labour nor the SNP Green Coalition has that plan. The only party with a credible plan to work with our oil and gas industry and renewable sectors to get to net zero whilst keeping the lights on, our homes warm and the economy moving without losing the skills and experience needed to deliver the energy transition is the Scottish Conservatives. And that's why I have pleasure in moving the motion in my name.